I've been driving trucks for nearly 15 years, and after spending that long on the road, you develop a certain understanding of the places most people never see. You learn how empty highways sound at night. You learn how different the world feels when you're hundreds of miles away from the nearest city. You learn that darkness itself can almost feel like another passenger sitting quietly beside you. But nothing I experienced before or since compares to what happened to me in 2017 while crossing the Mojave Desert. I was driving an overnight haul through California heading toward Arizona. I believe I was delivering appliances, although after everything that happened, the details of the job itself became almost meaningless. The only thing I remember clearly is the road and the darkness. The desert at night is unlike anywhere else. There are no streetlights, no buildings, no signs of civilization, just endless blackness stretching in every direction. At the time, the headlights on my semi-truck were in terrible shape. I'd been putting off replacing them for longer than I should have. During the daytime, I barely noticed the difference. But that night, that mistake suddenly mattered. The beams barely reached far enough ahead of me, forcing me to constantly strain my eyes just to make out where the road disappeared into the distance. Every few seconds, I found myself leaning forward, focusing harder, trying to identify whether the shape ahead was a shadow, an animal, or simply nothing at all. Looking back, that alone could have been the beginning of a nightmare. I actually considered pulling over. I thought about parking somewhere safe and waiting for sunrise, but at that point in my life, I couldn't afford to lose time. I needed the money, so I kept driving. The highway was mostly straight. There were almost no other vehicles. I convinced myself I was fine. I convinced myself I could handle it. And that was probably the first mistake I made that night. It was roughly an hour before sunrise when something appeared in the distance. At first, I couldn't tell what it was. A shape, a shadow, something sitting directly in my path. It seemed to be moving strangely, and my first thought was that an animal had wandered onto the highway. Without thinking, I slammed on the brakes. The truck screamed as the tires fought against the pavement. The entire cab shook. For a moment, I thought I was going to hit whatever was there. Then my headlights finally revealed the truth. It wasn't an animal. It was a car. A red Ford Fusion. Stopped in the middle of the highway, not on the shoulder, not pulled over. Right in the center of the road, perfectly aligned with the double yellow lines. Its hazard lights were flashing, and the passenger door was wide open. My semi came to a stop barely a foot away from it. I remember sitting there for a few seconds staring through the windshield. The whole situation felt wrong. Not necessarily terrifying, just wrong. I've never been the type of person who scares easily. I've been around rough people. I've been in situations where things could have gone badly. I know how to handle myself. So my first reaction wasn't fear. It was curiosity. I assumed someone needed help. Maybe the car had broken down. Maybe the driver needed to jump. Maybe someone had gotten tired and pulled over in the worst possible place imaginable. I reversed the truck, pulled off as safely as I could, and stepped down onto the road. I thought about putting out emergency flares, but the highway was completely empty. I hadn't seen another vehicle for miles. The only thing out there was me and that car. I walked toward it. The night was strangely calm. That is one detail I still remember vividly. The desert air was warm, completely still. There was almost no wind, no insects, no distant animals, nothing. The only sound came from the faint clicking of the hazard lights. Click, click, click. In the middle of the Mojave Desert, it sounded impossibly loud, like the entire world had gone silent just to listen. As I approached the vehicle, I slowed down. Something about it bothered me. I couldn't explain why. The car looked almost brand new. A clean, red Ford Fusion sitting abandoned in the middle of nowhere. Passenger door open, hazard lights flashing. No person in sight. I reached the side of the car and looked inside. Empty. I froze. At first, I thought maybe I had missed something. Maybe someone was lying down in the back. Maybe they had crawled underneath. So I checked. The back seat. The floor. Everywhere someone could possibly be hiding. Nothing. Nobody. The car was completely abandoned. And suddenly, my entire mindset changed. A minute earlier, I had been thinking about helping someone. Now I was wondering where that person had gone. I looked behind me, then to both sides of the highway. The darkness swallowed everything beyond the reach of my truck's headlights. If someone was standing 20 feet away from me, I probably wouldn't have seen them. That thought made my stomach tighten. I suddenly felt exposed, like I was standing in the middle of a giant empty room with no walls. I considered getting back into my truck and leaving. Part of me screamed that I should, but another part of me needed answers. Against my better judgment, I kept investigating. I looked through the interior again. Everything seemed completely normal. No signs of a struggle. No damage. No obvious emergency. Then I noticed something strange. The keys were still in the ignition. The engine was off. Why would someone abandon a car like that? I grabbed the keys and looked around again. Still nothing. Then I walked toward the trunk. I figured there had to be some explanation. Maybe something inside would tell me where the driver went. I tried opening it. Nothing. Locked. I used the key. Still nothing. The trunk wouldn't move. It felt like it was being held shut from the inside. That was when I started feeling genuinely uneasy. I opened the back door and tried reaching the trunk release from inside. To my surprise, it opened, and what I saw made my entire body tense. Inside were 3 heavy garbage bags, and a thick rope wrapped around them securing the trunk closed. I stared at them. I don't know exactly how long I stood there. Maybe a few seconds. Maybe longer. But I remember one thought entering my mind. Why would someone tie garbage bags shut inside the trunk of an abandoned car in the middle of the desert? I looked over my shoulder. The road was empty. The desert was silent. Nothing moved. So I reached toward one of the bags. I was maybe 5 inches away. And then, a gunshot exploded through the night. The sound was so violent and sudden that my entire body reacted before my brain could process it. I slammed my head against the roof of the car. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. I didn't think. I didn't investigate. I didn't ask questions. I threw the keys onto the front seat and got out of that vehicle as fast as humanly possible. As I ran back toward my semi, I heard something. A voice. Low, rough. Coming from somewhere in the darkness. Hey, then again. Hey. The voice sounded closer. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to know where it was coming from. I climbed into the truck, started the engine, and threw it into gear. My hands were shaking. The engine hesitated. For one horrible second, it felt like the truck wasn't going to move. I cursed. I hit the controls. Anything. Everything. Finally, the truck responded. And as I pulled away, I saw him. Standing beside the trunk of the red Ford Fusion. A man. Short. Heavy-set. Red hair. He wore overalls and tall rubber boots. In one hand, he held a small shovel. In the other, an old hunting rifle. Our eyes met. Only for a few seconds. But I'll never forget his expression. It wasn't anger. It wasn't madness. It was worry. Almost panic. Like he desperately needed me to stop. He dropped the shovel. Started waving his arms. Wait. But there was no chance I was stopping. Not after finding that car. Not after hearing that gunshot. Not after seeing a stranger standing beside a locked trunk in the middle of nowhere holding a rifle. As I accelerated away, I watched him through my mirrors. He ran after my truck for a few seconds, then stopped, turned around, and sprinted back toward his car. He wanted me to stop. That much was obvious. But there was absolutely no world where I was getting out of that truck again. I pushed the semi harder than I probably should have. The desert disappeared behind me. For about 5 minutes, I started believing I had escaped. I started thinking maybe I was finally safe. Then I saw headlights behind me, coming fast. Too fast. The same car. My entire body went cold. I had never felt fear like that before. Not from a person. Not from a situation. Not in 15 years on the road. I grabbed my phone and called the police. I tried explaining everything while keeping my eyes on the headlights, rapidly closing the distance behind me. The vehicle got closer. Closer. Then, it was right on my tail. The driver began honking repeatedly. The sound echoed through the empty desert highway. And sitting there behind the wheel of my semi with nowhere to turn and miles of darkness surrounding me, I had no idea what was going to happen next. I didn't slow down. I didn't stop. I didn't even consider trying to figure out what he wanted. At that point, my only thought was simple. Get away. I kept my hands locked around the steering wheel, staring at the road ahead while silently praying he wouldn't try something desperate. A semi-truck isn't exactly easy to maneuver, especially at night on an empty highway. If he wanted to ram me, force me off the road, or cause an accident, there wasn't much I could do except keep moving and hope for the best. For nearly 15 minutes, the headlights stayed behind me. Always there. Always close. Every time I looked into the mirror, I saw the same vehicle following. The desert stretched endlessly around us. No buildings. No exits. No witnesses. Just 2 vehicles cutting through the darkness. Then suddenly, the car accelerated. My heart dropped. The headlights grew brighter. Closer. Closer. And then the vehicle moved around me. For a moment, I thought he was finally passing. I was wrong. He pulled directly in front of my semi and slammed on his brakes. My entire body tensed. The distance disappeared instantly. The back of his car filled my windshield. I hit my brakes as hard as I could. The truck shook violently. The trailer behind me swayed. For a terrifying second, I thought I was going to crash straight into him. Then, through the windshield, I saw flashing lights. Police. Up ahead, almost as if the timing couldn't have been more perfect. The second the Ford noticed the patrol lights, everything changed. The driver swerved sharply to the right. The car left the highway. Dust exploded behind it as it raced into the desert. Within seconds, the headlights disappeared into the darkness. Gone, I pulled over immediately and waited for the officer. My hands were still shaking. My heart was still pounding. The moment he approached, I started explaining everything. The abandoned car, the open door, the garbage bags, the rifle, the man chasing me. The way he had tried to force me to stop. I expected urgency. I expected the officer to immediately get back in his cruiser and search for the vehicle before it disappeared completely. Instead, he started taking my statement, writing a report, asking questions. Normally, I understand that procedure matters, but in that moment all I could think was, he's getting away. I told the officer more than once, if you leave now, you might still catch him. The guy had only been gone for a few minutes. He had driven directly into the desert. There was a chance, a real chance. But the officer remained calm. He told me not to worry. He assured me that additional units would conduct a proper search once backup arrived. Eventually, he told me I could continue on my route. He said if they discovered anything, they would contact me. They never did. No phone call, no update, no explanation, nothing. To this day, I have no idea what happened out there. I've told this story more times than I can count. Every person who hears it has the same immediate reaction. They all say the same thing. That guy was definitely hiding something. And honestly, I understand why. A car abandoned in the middle of the desert. A locked trunk. Garbage bags. Rope. A man with a rifle chasing someone who discovered it. It sounds like something pulled straight from a crime documentary. But here's the problem. Even the obvious explanation doesn't perfectly fit. People immediately assume he was burying bodies. But that raises more questions. Why was the shovel so small? Why were the bags so small? Why would he leave his vehicle sitting in the middle of a highway with hazard lights flashing? Why would he allow a random truck driver to get close enough to discover everything? Some of my friends have suggested darker possibilities. Maybe he was involved in something worse. Maybe the bags contained evidence. Maybe he was hiding something he desperately didn't want anyone to find. Personally, for my own peace of mind, I prefer a less horrifying explanation. I like to believe he was dealing with some kind of animal situation. Maybe he was burying a dead animal. Maybe he was handling a dangerous creature. Maybe he was trying to put an injured or suffering animal out of its misery. I don't know, and honestly I don't think I'll ever know. But one thing is certain. After that night, I was never comfortable driving through empty deserts after dark again. There is something about endless roads and complete isolation that changes the way your mind works. When you're alone for hours, surrounded by nothing but darkness, every strange detail becomes louder. Every shadow becomes a question. Every unexpected vehicle becomes a potential threat. I've seen a lot of modern trucking videos online where drivers record their daily routines, share advice, and talk about life on the road. Being younger in this industry, whenever I open TikTok or YouTube Shorts, that's usually what fills my feed. A lot of people assume trucking is just driving. They see the highways, the scenery, the freedom. What they don't see is the isolation. They don't see the long hours sitting alone with nothing but your thoughts. They don't understand how different your own mind can feel when you're trapped inside a moving vehicle for 12 straight hours. I actually had a completely different path planned for my life. I had been attending a fairly prestigious university before personal circumstances forced me to leave. People often tell me I could have become something else. That I wasted potential. That I should have chosen a different career. But honestly, I don't hate trucking. It's demanding. It's lonely. It's exhausting. But there is something strangely honest about it. The road doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care about your background, your education, or your plans. It just keeps going. I've been making deliveries for over 2 years now, and the hardest part of this job isn't the physical work. It's the isolation. You don't truly understand what being alone for hours does to your mind until you've experienced it. My biggest advice to anyone entering this profession would be simple. Make peace with your own thoughts. Because when you're driving through empty highways at 3 in the morning, there is nowhere to hide from them. Every memory, every fear, every insecurity, everything you've pushed away during normal life has a way of coming back. That's exactly what happened to me. And unlike my desert encounter, this time the danger wasn't waiting outside my truck. It was already inside my own head. This happened only 3 months after I started working for my first trucking company. I was brand new, still learning the lifestyle, still adjusting to what it meant to spend most of my time alone. I had a delivery route from southern New Jersey to Lafayette, Indiana, a drive of roughly 12 hours. For many people, 12 hours behind the wheel already sounds exhausting. But there was an important detail. Before that trip, I had just finished another 8-hour delivery run. I was already tired, already worn down, but I wanted to finish as quickly as possible. So instead of stopping overnight, I decided to drive through the darkness. My plan was to arrive in Lafayette just before 3:00 a.m. At first, everything went smoothly. The roads were almost completely empty. No traffic, no distractions, just miles of highway disappearing beneath my tires. Because there were so few vehicles around, I was able to maintain a slightly faster pace than normal. About halfway through the trip, I reached down toward the center console. I wanted a drink, a Red Bull, something to keep me awake. I grabbed around. Nothing. Then I remembered. I hadn't restocked the truck after my previous delivery. I had completely forgotten. I hit the dashboard in frustration. There was nothing I hated more than stopping during a long drive. I know that probably sounds strange, but for me, stopping was always dangerous. Not because of anything outside the truck, because of what happened inside my own body. The moment the vehicle stopped moving, my exhaustion seemed to multiply. Even if I only stepped away for 20 seconds, getting back behind the wheel felt 10 times harder. But now I had a choice. Continue driving and risk falling asleep, or stop and find caffeine. At that moment, my exhausted brain viewed both options as equally dangerous. Reluctantly, I took the next exit and pulled into the first place that looked like it might have a store. I had no idea where I was. Somewhere in Ohio, probably. The parking lot was dark. The building looked abandoned. At first, I thought I had found a small service station, but as I got closer, I realized something was wrong. It wasn't a normal rest stop. It looked like an old gas station that had been closed for years. A forgotten convenience store sitting alone beside the highway. The kind of place you only notice because you're desperate enough to stop. I slowed down and looked ahead. Thankfully, I could see another store farther down the road, a place that actually appeared open, so I decided to keep going. At the time, I thought I was simply making a quick detour for an energy drink. I had no idea that stopping at that abandoned-looking station would become the beginning of another night I would never forget. I decided I would check the abandoned store first. At the time, it seemed like the simplest option. If it was open, great. I could grab something to drink and get back on the road. If it was locked, I would move on. Either way, I would only lose a few minutes. That was what I thought. I parked my semi nearby and walked toward the old convenience store. The building looked like it had been forgotten for years. The windows were dark. The parking lot was empty. There were no signs of life anywhere. To be honest, I expected one of two things. Either the door would be locked, or I would find a completely abandoned building. What I didn't expect was for the door to open. I reached for the handle, pulled gently, and the door swung inward. Immediately, I was met with darkness. Not dim lighting. Not a store with a few broken bulbs. Complete darkness. The kind of darkness where your eyes need time to adjust before you can even understand what you're looking at. I stood there for a moment, letting my vision adapt. The inside smelled old, like dust, damp air in a building that had been sitting untouched for far too long. I stepped inside carefully. My first thought was that maybe I would get lucky. Maybe there was still a forgotten drink somewhere. Maybe an old vending machine still worked. Maybe someone had simply abandoned the place without clearing everything out. I searched around. Nothing. No shelves stocked with food. No drinks. No signs that anyone had been there recently. Just an empty shell. I was about to turn around and leave when something caught my attention. A faint glow. Very weak. Almost impossible to notice. It was coming from the far corner of the room. I walked toward it slowly. The light was coming from what appeared to be a small back room. Curiosity got the better of me. I pushed the door open, and surprisingly, there was a refrigerator. A working refrigerator. The light inside was on. The appliance was plugged in. For a second, I actually felt relieved. I thought I had found exactly what I needed. A cold drink. Anything. I opened the refrigerator door, and then I froze. There was nothing inside. Not one bottle. Not one can. Not even an old piece of food. The shelves had been completely removed. The entire interior had been stripped. It wasn't an empty refrigerator. It was a refrigerator that had been deliberately emptied, almost like someone had taken everything useful and left only the shell behind. I stood there trying to understand why someone would leave a powered refrigerator running inside an abandoned store. It didn't make sense. As I closed the door, I heard something. A sound from the main room. A sharp clatter. like something hitting the floor. I stopped instantly. Every muscle in my body tightened. For about 10 seconds, I didn't move. I just listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. No movement. I told myself I probably imagined it. Maybe something had fallen because of the old building settling. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe it was nothing. Still, I walked back into the main room slowly. I looked around. Nothing. The store was exactly as I had left it. But the feeling had changed. A few minutes earlier, I had been curious. Now I wanted to leave. I didn't have time to investigate some abandoned building in the middle of nowhere, so I walked out. Almost immediately, I started moving faster. Not running, but close. I crossed the parking lot and headed toward the other store down the road. Thankfully, that one was open. The bright lights inside felt almost comforting. I bought my drink, paid quickly, and got back outside. The entire time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I needed to get back into my truck. I needed to leave. I needed distance. Before climbing back into the cab, I looked over at the abandoned store one last time, and that's when I noticed it. The door. It was open. I stopped. I knew I had closed it. I was certain. I remembered pulling it shut behind me, but now it was standing open again, a dark entrance staring back at me. I felt a chill run through me, but I also knew something important. It wasn't my responsibility to figure out what was happening there. I wasn't a detective. I wasn't looking for trouble. I was a truck driver who needed to finish a delivery, so I started the engine, pulled back onto the highway, and left the abandoned store behind. At least, I thought I had. The caffeine hit quickly. The exhaustion that had been clouding my mind started fading, and as I became more alert, my thoughts returned to what had happened. The abandoned building, the working refrigerator, the strange noise, the open door. Maybe someone was squatting there. Maybe the building wasn't as abandoned as it looked. That explanation made sense. But one question kept bothering me. Why was that refrigerator still running? I couldn't come up with a good answer. Eventually, I forced myself to stop thinking about it. I focused on the road ahead. Then I noticed something. Movement. Behind me. At first, I ignored it. I assumed it was a reflection, a trick of the darkness. But then I saw it again. The curtain separating the front of my truck from the sleeper area was moving, swaying, shifting, like someone was touching it. My stomach dropped. The air conditioning wasn't running. The windows were closed. There was no reason for that curtain to move. I stared at it through the rearview mirror. Slowly, my mind reached the only conclusion it could. Someone was inside my truck. I felt sweat forming on my forehead. Suddenly, every shadow behind me seemed different. Every sound felt louder. I didn't have a weapon. I had no idea who was back there. I didn't know how long they had been hiding. I didn't know what they wanted. I kept driving while trying not to panic. Without making any sudden movements, I pulled out my phone and searched for the nearest police station. The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. Every second felt unbearable. I imagined a hand reaching forward from behind the curtain. I imagined someone grabbing me. I imagined losing control of the truck. My mind created 100 terrifying possibilities. Finally, the police station appeared ahead. I pulled over as close as I could. The moment the truck stopped, I jumped out. I didn't even wait. I ran straight toward the building. Within moments, officers surrounded my semi. They approached carefully. I explained everything. The abandoned store, the strange feeling, the moving curtain, the possibility that someone was hiding inside. They opened the back, and what they found is something I will never forget. They pulled out 3 people, 2 men and 1 woman. All 3 looked homeless. Their clothes were torn and dirty. They were wrapped in filthy blankets. They looked like they had been hiding there for some time. One of the men was carrying 2 switchblades. As officers placed them in handcuffs, none of them explained themselves. None of them apologized. They just stared at me, coldly, silently, like they were angry that I had discovered them. To this day, I still don't know what they wanted. I don't know how long they had been inside my truck. I don't know if they intended to steal something. I don't know if they planned to hurt me. And honestly, I don't think I want to know. My name is Kevin. I've spent almost 15 years driving trucks for different companies. At this point, the job has become routine. Pick up the load, check the materials, confirm everything is correct, deliver it where it needs to go. Simple? In this industry, efficiency matters. Most drivers aren't paid by the hour. The faster and safer you complete a route, the better. After doing this for so long, I like to think I can still keep up with the younger drivers entering the business. But sometimes that mindset works against you, because when you've been doing something for years, you start believing you're tougher than you really are. You convince yourself you can push further. Drive longer. Sleep less. Ignore the warning signs. 4 years ago, I learned that lesson. At the time, I was working for a warehouse company based in North Dakota. For anyone unfamiliar with the state, it's incredibly flat. Miles and miles of open land. For truckers, that can make driving easier, but it also means there aren't many distractions. No cities. No traffic. No reason to stop. And sometimes that makes drivers push themselves too far. It was a cold Tuesday morning in May. The beginning of the week meant more shipments, more deliveries, more pressure. I wanted to complete everything in one trip, so I planned a route into Montana without stopping overnight. I left a few hours after lunch. My goal was to arrive early the next morning. The drive started normally. Everything felt manageable. I pushed the truck slightly faster than usual. Nothing reckless, just trying to save time. But as midnight passed, fatigue started catching up. I remember rubbing my eyes while staring at the clock. My eyelids felt heavy. My focus was slipping. I only had about an hour left. Just one more hour. So I forced myself to continue. Years earlier, another trucker friend named Tristan introduced me to smelling salts. If you've never used them, they're small containers with crystals that release a sharp chemical smell. One sniff and you're suddenly awake. At least temporarily. Tristan always warned me not to rely on them too much. They weren't magic. They didn't replace sleep. They just tricked your body into becoming alert. They burned your nose. They shocked your senses. But when you're fighting exhaustion at midnight on an empty highway, sometimes people convince themselves they need anything that keeps them moving. When I needed a boost, I always reached for the smelling salts first. And that night, I needed them badly. I pulled out the small container, took a deep breath, and gave it a strong sniff. The reaction was immediate. My head snapped back. My eyes widened. My entire body jolted awake as adrenaline rushed through me. For a brief moment, it felt like someone had flipped a switch inside my brain. The exhaustion disappeared. My focus returned. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. I convinced myself I could make it. Just a little longer. Just finish the drive. I hoped the effect would last until I reached my destination. But it didn't. Not even close. About 30 minutes passed. And slowly, the fatigue started creeping back in. The highway blurred slightly. My eyelids became heavier. My thoughts became slower. I fought it. I told myself I was fine. I told myself I could push through. Then suddenly, the truck drifted. The tires crossed onto the shoulder. The loud rumbling sound from the edge of the road ripped me out of my half-sleep. I jerked the steering wheel back. My heart slammed against my chest. That was the moment I admitted the truth. This wasn't just tired anymore. This was dangerous. I was gambling with my life. I needed to stop. Immediately. The problem was, there was nowhere to stop. The highway stretched endlessly ahead of me. No gas station. No rest area. No exit. No lights in the distance. Just trees. Dense woods on both sides of the road. I slowed the semi down, desperately searching for somewhere safe to pull over. At the reduced speed, my headlights finally had a chance to cut deeper into the darkness. And that's when I saw something. Something that made absolutely no sense. A purple dress, lying in the middle of the road. I stared at it. For a moment, my exhausted brain couldn't process what I was seeing. A dress. Out here. In the middle of nowhere. I rubbed my eyes. Maybe I was hallucinating. Maybe exhaustion had finally caught up with me. I blinked several times. Once, twice. 6 times. But it didn't disappear. It was real. A purple dress sitting alone on the highway. I slowly drove past it, staring through the windshield. Looking back, that should have been the first moment I realized something was seriously wrong. But exhaustion does strange things to your mind. When you're tired enough, your brain searches for the easiest explanation. Maybe someone lost it. Maybe it fell from another vehicle. Maybe there was a perfectly normal reason. I wanted there to be a normal reason. A couple 100 yards later, I saw another object. A pair of shoes. Sitting near the road. My stomach tightened. The dress was strange. The shoes were worse. Because now there was a pattern. Someone wasn't just losing random items. Something had happened. I kept driving slowly, silently, begging to find somewhere to pull over. I remember reaching down and grabbing the old cross that belonged to my father, David. My dad was an incredibly religious man. He always believed there was a reason behind everything. At that moment alone, on that dark highway, I held onto that cross and hoped he was somehow watching over me. A little farther ahead, I saw more. Clothes scattered across the road. Not just 1 or 2 pieces. A pile. Mixed together. And some of it looked like children's clothing. That was when the fear finally broke through the exhaustion. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I brought the truck to a stop. The engine continued running. The headlights illuminated the scattered clothing. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, waiting. I don't know what I expected. Someone to appear. A vehicle to approach. A voice from the woods. Anything. But nothing happened. The silence was unbearable. Eventually, my instincts told me I couldn't just sit there. I needed to know what I was looking at. Slowly, I opened the door and stepped down from the truck. The cold morning air hit me immediately. The chill cut through my clothes and sent a wave of awareness through my exhausted body. Honestly, the cold helped. For the first time in hours, I felt completely awake. I approached the clothing carefully. Every step felt heavier than the last. I kept looking around, checking the tree line, checking behind me, checking the road. I felt like I was walking into a situation I didn't understand. When I reached the pile, I confirmed what I already feared. They were children's clothes. Not just one child's clothing either. There appeared to be both boys' and girls' clothes mixed together. Small shirts, small pants, pieces of clothing that clearly belonged to children. I stared down at them. My mind raced. Why were these here? Who left them? Where were the children? I looked toward the woods. The darkness between the trees was almost impossible to see through. My headlights only reached so far. Beyond that, there was nothing. Just shadows. I slowly turned in a circle, scanning the area. My instincts were screaming at me. Every survival instinct I had was telling me that standing there was a mistake. This didn't feel like a random roadside accident. It felt wrong, like I had walked into something I was never supposed to find. Eventually, I made a decision. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't something I should involve myself in. Not alone. Not in the middle of nowhere. Not before sunrise. I started walking back toward my truck. Then, a sound. From the left side of the road. A crunch. Like someone stepping on dry branches. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked. Slowly, I turned toward the sound. Nothing. Just darkness. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Nothing moved. I almost convinced myself it was an animal. Then, another crunch. This time from the opposite side of the road. My blood went cold. Whatever made that sound, it wasn't in one place. It was moving. My survival instincts took over. I turned and ran. I don't remember deciding to run. My body just did it. I sprinted back toward the semi as fast as I could. I grabbed the door, pulled myself inside, and just as I was about to slam it shut, I heard it. A sound that still haunts me. A child's scream. Piercing. Terrified. Coming from somewhere in the darkness. I froze. My hand stayed on the door. My heart felt like it was trying to break through my chest. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. Because in that moment, one terrifying thought entered my mind. There was a child out there. And somehow, I had been the only person who heard them. I was trapped in a decision that no person should ever have to make. On one side, there was the obvious danger. A completely dark forest. Unknown people hiding somewhere beyond the reach of my headlights. A situation I didn't understand. I was a truck driver, not a police officer. I wasn't trained to walk into the woods alone in the middle of the night and confront whoever might be waiting there. But on the other side, I couldn't ignore what I had heard. Because if those screams were real, if there really was a child out there, how could I simply drive away? How could I live with myself knowing I might have left someone helpless behind? That was the thought fighting against every instinct telling me to stay inside my truck. I was still frozen, trying to decide what to do when it happened again. Another scream. Almost identical. A child's voice. Same sound. Same fear. But this time, something felt different. The timing was too perfect. It was like someone wanted me to react. Before I could think any longer, my body moved. I climbed back into the driver's seat, turned the key. The engine roared to life. I shifted the truck into gear and aimed the headlights toward the area where the scream had come from. The powerful beams cut through the darkness. For a moment, the woods were exposed, and that's when I saw them. About 30 yards into the trees, there were people standing there. 3, maybe 4. My eyes struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. One of them was holding something large. At first, I couldn't understand what it was. Then the light caught it. A speaker. A massive speaker. They weren't searching. They weren't helping someone. They weren't trying to find a child. They were hiding. The moment my headlights hit them, they immediately reacted. They moved quickly behind the trees, trying to disappear back into the darkness. But for a few seconds, just a few seconds, I saw enough. Enough to understand what was happening. They weren't following a scream, they were creating one. They were holding a speaker and playing the sound of a child crying out, trying to make someone stop, trying to make someone leave their vehicle, trying to make someone walk into those woods. I sat there completely frozen. My brain couldn't process it. The exhaustion, the confusion, the fear. Everything hit me at once. Those people had been waiting, and I had almost walked directly toward them. I swear on my father David's memory, that is exactly what I saw. A group of people using a fake child's scream as bait. I reached for my phone. I needed to call the police. I needed to report what was happening. My fingers had barely touched the screen when, thump, a sudden impact hit the back of the truck. Someone had thrown something. My entire body reacted instantly. That was enough. I was done. Whatever they wanted. Whatever their plan was, I was not staying there another second. I threw the truck back into motion and accelerated onto the highway. As I pulled away, I caught movement on the opposite side of the road. Someone standing there, watching. The figure shouted something. I couldn't understand the words. Then their arm moved. Something flew through the air. A second later, crack. My passenger side window fractured from the impact. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I didn't even look back. I just drove. The final hour of that delivery was completely silent. No music, no radio, no phone calls, nothing. I sat behind the wheel, gripping it tightly, trying to process what had just happened. But my mind couldn't make sense of it. The abandoned clothing, the fake screams, the people hiding in the woods, the object thrown at my truck. Every explanation I came up with somehow made the situation even worse. One thing was certain. There was no chance I was pulling over to sleep after that. Not in those woods. Not anywhere nearby. I finished the delivery and immediately found somewhere safe to rest. The moment my head hit the pillow, I was gone. I slept for nearly 10 hours straight. When I woke up, the first thing I did was call the police. I explained everything. The clothing, the voices, the people with the speaker, the damaged window. They told me they would investigate the area and let me know if they discovered anything. I never received any major update. To this day, I still don't know exactly what those people were trying to accomplish. And honestly, that uncertainty bothers me more than anything, because the questions never stop. Why did they use a child's scream? Why leave clothing scattered across the road? Why try to lure a stranger into the woods? Why didn't they attack when I was standing outside my truck, completely unaware? What was supposed to happen if I had actually followed that scream? Would I have found someone needing help? Or would I have walked straight into a trap? Those questions have stayed with me for years. And sometimes I think back to that moment when I stepped out of my truck. I think about how easily things could have gone differently, how one decision could have changed everything. I still believe I made the right choice by stopping, because if there had truly been a child out there, I couldn't have ignored it. But I also know something now that I didn't know then. Not every cry for help is real. Sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't hearing a scream in the darkness. It's realizing someone created that scream because they wanted you to come closer. After nearly 15 years of trucking, I've seen strange things. I've driven through storms. I've crossed empty highways. I've spent countless nights alone on the road. But nothing, absolutely nothing, has ever come close to the fear I felt that night in those woods. Because for a few terrifying minutes, I wasn't just driving through the darkness. I was being invited into it.